melt is when I'm ocean waves.
Today on Racing Legends podcast, I have Najja Thompson, the executive director of New York Thoroughbred Breeders Breeders Association. Najja, did I say that right?
Yeah, New York Thoroughbred Breeders Incorporated, and we are the Breeder Member Association of New York State.
Okay, it's a mouthful. But we know
is.
who you are. I just got to make sure I say it right.
Sure.
Well, look, thanks for joining me, Najja.
Thank you for having me on, Julian. A pleasure to be here.
Oh, of course. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is there are not a whole lot of minorities in racing, and you probably asked this quite a lot. There's a couple of tremendous riders like Kendrick Carmouche. There's minority riders around the country, but not a whole lot of prominent riders. Trainers, there's been some very successful Black trainers at a local level, but none of the big trainers happen to be African American. The same goes for almost every level of the game. If you look at the backstretch, there's some great horsemen that work for other horsemen that are Black. What is it like for you to be a minority in a racing game where there's not a whole lot of other minorities that succeed?
Yeah, definitely, Julian. As you mentioned, unfortunately, at the current moment, I think we are underrepresented in the thoroughbred racing industry. Things we can look to is that we have a glorious past within the game where African Americans were very instrumental in not only the training and caring of horses, but being successful jockeys as well. And looking at a case at history, we know what happened during the Jim Crow era, where many African Americans were driven out of the game by racism. And it's taken over that time really for us to get back inside of racing. And I look at myself as an example of a person that hopefully can serve as an example and also to help other African Americans and minorities reach the prominent positions in the thoroughbred racing world. That's going to take very diversity of ownership. I think the more as we promote our game, and as well, racetracks and the racing industry need to do a better job in making diverse hires and making that introductions from a young age. I was introduced to thoroughbred racing via my uncle and family by going to the racetrack and visiting Belmont Park, later Calder Racecourse and Gulfstream Park. But it's going to take that outreach from the industry and partnering with organizations and schools for us to get that diversity that we need, because there has been plenty of research done that diverse industries are more successful in reaching out and definitely being more successful.
Yeah. Well, African Americans love racing. If you go to the racetrack, there are Black customers. Ever since I've been going to the track many years ago, I've always seen we like racing. What is it in particular about the horse racing industry do you think that Blacks have had difficulties getting established? Like I'm sure when you go to meetings, you probably have to feel the presumption is against you in some ways. You have to prove yourself. I've had the same thing in my executive career and sales career as well. But what is it in particular about racing? Do you think it's been particularly hard for minorities to get ahead?
Yeah, I think in racing, you have an example where it can be very insulated. There are a lot of relationships that are familial relationships. You have a lot of racing dynasty families. And so the circle that you are starting with is very small. And it's how can we infiltrate that circle? I was, fortunate enough through via hard work and internships and working my way up 10 years at NYRA and other racing experience to get to where I am today. And that's why I said, the onus is partially on the racetracks and the industry itself to reach out and make sure that we're making inroads and that the industry is not so insular, where, as you mentioned, we do have a diversified customer base. How do we transition that customer base to working in the industry as well? You've seen other organizations and other sports, such as the NBA, do a better job in making their front offices diversified, and racing needs to do so as well.
Yeah. Do you find it any different in New York than the rest of the country? As like in the South, is there less minority reputation, or you think this is a problem for racing in general, no matter where you are?
I think it's definitely a problem that unfortunately, the whole industry has. It's not just whether New York, as you mentioned, I'm often, one of the few or only African Americans in the boardrooms or in high ranking positions. And I think that equates the same for, any other region in the game. But not only reflective of racing, it's an issue that occurs across all industry and all aspects in America. We of course we need to take an exhaustive look and intensive approach on how we can make racing better, but it's also an issue that affects our whole country in a variety of industry where we need to make a better outreach to diversify our companies and make a more accurate representation of what America is today.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned family contacts and involvement in racing. I used to go to the racetrack with my grandfather. That's how I got started. And I think a lot of people get started in that fashion. How about you? I read somewhere that I think you had a uncle that was into breeding. How exactly did you get into racing?
Yeah, my family is Jamaican ancestry. So Jamaican is a former British colony, has a racetrack down there, Kimanis Park. And he grew up going to the racetrack, was able to own racehorses in Jamaica and was quite successful. And once our whole family immigrated, I was born in New York. He continued that passion of, going to the racetrack and bringing me when I was a young child. So I really grew up, early 90s, I would say late 80s, early 90s, going to Naira, Belmont. And then later our family moved to South Florida. So continuing that in attending Calder and Gulfstream. And he transitioned over to even breeding here in America. And, he's bred greatest stakes winners and some Florida bred champions. So I really got that overall dynamic scope and experience throughout the industry. But it was thanks to him and his influence. And as you mentioned, most of us, regardless of where we're from, are really entered and introduced to the game by an older relative or a person who took us to the racetrack.
Were you a big fan of the game? I know you have that relationship with your uncle, but did you love to bet on the horses? Did you like to handicap the races as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's the challenge of what racing is really finding that puzzle of who is going to win by studying the form, but also seeing the great athletes that we have in thoroughbred racehorses. So, I grew up during the NTRA's Go Baby Go
Oh
era and
yeah.
those commercials. And then, watching Breeders' Cup races and key races on ESPN at the time. Now we've transitioned to where we have Fox Sports nationally broadcasting our races and NBC as well. So, no, I was definitely fully entrenched into the game from all aspects.
That was what was the Baffert horse? Real Quiet. That was about that
Yeah,
time. Go Baby Go.
correct. Yeah, and Real Quiet was going for the $5 million Triple Crown Breeders'
Yeah.
Cup bonus, getting nipped at the wire by Victory Gallop. And it really mentions to anybody: you take an individual to the racetrack for a day, they're not gonna at least leave interested. If they leave winning, you've made a new fan. But they're definitely going to enjoy themselves and enjoy the day, seeing the great racing that takes place.
What's interesting? It just made me think of that. In the 70s, the NBA thought they had a problem. You're way too young for this, but the NBA had a problem because the NBA had gotten, for some people, too black. So it went from in 1970, there's probably 10% African Americans on the team, to by the end of the 80s, like the New York Knicks were all black, and they worried about the customer base. They worried that the white fans aren't going to come out. It's interesting in racing. Most of the superstars in racing, like the Bob Bafferts, D. Wayne Lucas is great in front of the cameras. Even back in the Secretariat days, Penny Trenery, or most of on the jockeys, of course, Jerry Bailey, Gary Stevens, all well-spoken guys. They're great in front of the camera, but it never affected African Americans being fans of the sport. It's interesting how we look at that as a way we had to have white players in the NBA to appeal to white fans, but we never felt that way about racing. It was never really an initiative to worry about the black customer.
No, that's a good point that you make there, Julian. And of course, we've also had a tremendous amount of Latin American key jockeys and trainers over the course of history of the game. But I think our purchasing power, African Americans are always willing to support good quality product. And what now the industry has to do is reach back and include us in all facets and areas.
Yeah. So when did you decide you wanted to get into racing as a job?
I went to Florida State University, graduated with a degree in history and philosophy, was working in South Florida, and wasn't really, liking it. It was a marketing position at Verizon. And my uncle, he just told me, well, you love racing. There's got to be plenty of opportunities to make a living. And he was talking front office. Of course, there's positions such as trainer, assistant trainer on the backstretch that you can pursue, but I was more front office man myself. So, I put pen to pad and wrote various racetracks and recruiters at racetracks and doing the research from, internet searches, and was lucky enough to get on board with NYRA in 2011 and really worked my way up from there, first starting in website and marketing, transitioning to the press office, last in human resources, and then with the breeders currently.
And NYTB, it's affiliated with NYRA. It's part of NYRA, or is it separate?
It's separate, but we all work together. Of course, New York Thoroughbred Breeders is the membership breeder organization representing all breeders of New York Reds and breeders in New York State. What we do is advocate and really strategize with NYRA, with Finger Lakes in Western New York, and state legislators on not only promotion and the development of the game, but also how can we improve the quality of racing, the quality of New York Reds that are being produced. So I would say in general, my job is to increase the foal crop so that bettors have better field sizes, and our program continues to improve throughout the years.
Well, how did you? And we'll get back to exactly what what you guys do. But how'd you go from front office to the executive director? That seems to be a pretty big leap.
Yeah, no, certainly, definitely, I would say a 10-year plus overnight success story, one might say. But I was able to start out in the marketing department, and that was really with website and social media with NYRA in 2011. Worked there for 4 years and helped redevelop the NYRA website in its first refresh iteration, where we really tried to raise the bar, and what racing websites used to look like and what they currently look like is changed drastically. You can see the NYRA website has statistics and really kind of an ESPN or CNN SI kind of, modern look. So that was my, first transitioning to working with NYRA. Later moving on to the press office, it was covering the races day to day, and of course, each of the Triple Crowns and the great racing we have in New York. And through that position, I was able to make connections and, get yourself in front of people, because it really is about personal relationships as well as your, what you can bring to the table, your qualifications. So each step of the way, I always work to boost my qualification as experience. When I worked with the web, I made sure that I took programming classes on the side to make sure, I fortified myself and getting that experience. Transitioning to the press office, I made sure that I took subsequent writing classes to improve my writing structure. And when I joined HR at NYRA, briefly just before, COVID, and during that whole outbreak where executives at NYRA asked me to help with the team that would, work to ensure that who we brought back was properly acclimated and onboarded, as well as future employees. I made sure that I went out and got the proper HR training, through online. I took a certificate course through Cornell University. So each step of the way was about building my skills. And then the position for the executive director of the New York Thoroughbred Breeders became open, with their former executive, Jeffrey Canizzo, transitioning to NYRA in a government affairs role. And I put my name in the ring through subsequent interviews and talks. The board of directors for the New York Thoroughbred Breeders was happy to name me executive director.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, who are some of your most important mentors? We all need mentors and influences, because that is a meteoric rise. So who are the people that really set you on the right path, taught you, who were instrumental in telling you, look, don't be in the HR department, learn about HR, learn how to program? Who are the people that made you reach higher than you may have reached on your own?
Yeah, definitely. Within the industry, there are many. Starting with family would be my uncle, of course, parents, always driving me to do better. Within the industry, I would say several individuals at NYRA, including Andy Serling. He's been a good friend over time. I know he's kind of lightning rod with many people, but people really don't know that Andy really is a great guy and a great person once you get to know him, outside of racing opinions that you may differ with. But as well, there's been several individuals. John Durso was a former press director at NYRA. He was very instrumental for me. Jenny Kellner was also an assistant in the NYRA press department and a writer for many years. And Eric Wing as well was a former director and press communications director at NYRA. But each of those people helped me, encouraged me along the way to continue to rise, continue to gain the skills, and move on to subsequent divisions.
Yeah. I want to go on record and say that Andy Serling is great for the game. He's full of opinions. Some of them will drive you crazy, but he does create a buzz. He makes you interested in the game. We need more Andy Serlings. So even though he's probably said snippy comments to me on Twitter over the years, but he he doesn't know who I am. That's just Andy, I think.
Yeah, no, it's not personal at all. It's just going back and forth.
Exactly. So, well, you get this job as executive director, and was the job bigger than you thought it was going to be? I mean, what were some of the challenges you had on the job?
Yeah, definitely. I always knew it was a breeder membership organization, and of course, Naira and Finger Lakes definitely do their best to support the New York bred program, not only with the restricted bred program within each state. Legislatively, at least 600 races per year have to be New York restricted bred races, so that's a lot of racing. There's its own stakes program, but it definitely is more than I initially envisioned, with probably the legislative duties and making sure that you're active in the political world of Albany to make sure that legislators do recognize the significance of racing, what our members do to, save land space throughout the state. All of our breeders combined really saved 1.3 million acres in New York. So I guess where I had to learn more was the political active role, and of course our work with trying to get a new Belmont Park currently.
Yeah. One thing that racing needs to do a better job is taking care of the breeders, because if we had an overflow of horses, it would be so much easier for all the racing secretaries to fill races. Trainers would run their horses less when they're sore. It would create less medication, less incentive to dope. So it's breeders and it's also bettors. I think we can do more for breeders and bettors, and I think that would make the game better. And I don't think we talk enough about that. So also with regard to breeders and also what you do generally, do people realize what an effect on an economy that the races can have, not just on the area around Belmont Park or Aqueduct, Pimlico, Laurel, but it does to the whole state? The farms, the blacksmiths, the horses. It goes on and on. The accelerators that happen with the thoroughbred. And do you think it's widely understood how important the racing could be for the economy?
Unfortunately, no. And speaking to that, a year and a half ago, we formed the We Are New York Horse Racing Coalition here in New York between Naira, the breeders ourselves, and the horsemen. That's the New York Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association. So we could use that coalition to inform the general public and elected officials to the importance that racing brings to New York State in economic impact and jobs. We would hope for that other states around the region, including the Mid-Atlantic, whether the West Coast or even southern states, can also form coalitions and really work to inform their legislators as well to the impact that the racing industry and thoroughbred breeding industry provides in an overall number of sectors.
Yeah. Is the breeder bonus program, is it working?
Yes, it is extremely, effective in making sure that people, as a breeder, you're always getting a check for horses that you bred, go on to compete at the racetrack, and a significant amounts. 20 million in awards in New York are really distributed each year between our Stallion Awards program. Those are the owners of New York Stallion standing in New York. We have a Breeders' Awards program, and that's roughly 15.5 million per year. That's really distributed to the breeders who take the time to bring in a mare into New York State and foal here, and then later on race. You know that you'll always get a check. And as well, New York breds have been performing well at the sales each year. So as our quality continues to rise, you'll see that our own bonuses and incentives to running New York is competitive.
Yeah. Are you at a good number of brood mares in the state? Are more needed? Where are you guys with brood mares, and what are they kind of doing to try to encourage more breeding?
Yeah, you can never always have enough brood mares within the state. Yearly, we're putting about 1,500 foals on the ground each year in New York. And we'd, of course, like to increase that number because, as you mentioned, it's where it leads to for racing secretaries, making it easier, and for bettors in field size. And, a common complaint is, we just have a shortage of horses of our declining foal crop. So what we've done in New York is a number of initiatives to make it easier to bring mares in and make them resident mares. That means at a certain level, at threshold for $50,000 or more, if you're purchasing a brood mare at a sale, you will be able to, take that mare, foal if they're in foal in New York. That foal will be a New York bred, and you can use that mare as well to go back to the top regional stallions in your area throughout the country and foal back in New York. So what we're trying to do there is increase the quality. We have stallions that have increased over time. Of Lauban, who's a very quality stallion. Unfortunately, he passed. Currently, we have Central Banker. This year, we've added Mind Control to the stallion roster. So some exciting news. But we also want to equate that balance with bringing this, the Colts and fillies of the Mendelssohns, of the Candy Rides, and the Intermischiefs to fold to New York State as well. So we've tried to boost a number of programs to do just that.
Yeah. Are there programs in other states that you're particularly interested in that do really interesting things that you would like to see brought to New York?
Yeah, certainly. The Maryland Jockey Club does a great job with their program, with their incentives and bonuses. Pennsylvania as well, Florida, and these programs work well. And the way they're writing race conditions, Kentucky, of course, would be one of the premier programs, and how they're writing racing conditions and programs. So for Kentucky breds, the purses are so big, or in Florida, if you look at Gulfstream, they're so big for the native state breds versus to the open company horses. So we'd like to try some of those things in New York to bring more eyes on the program here. We have roughly, over 180 million in purses on the Naira circuit and Finger Lakes yearly in New York. So what can we do between that? 60 million of that is state bred purses. How can we continue to incentivize that for people to want to breed and race in New York?
Are there things that HISA could do to nationalize like breeding programs to increase the number of horses? I didn't know. Did HISA address the problem of breeding at all?
Right now, HISA is only regulated over horses who make their first workout as a 2-year-old at a track. So not at the sales level yet. Maybe that's another step. And of course, I think it's a great opportunity for us to entrust bettors. And what we want to do is also horsemen and owners as well, anybody participating in the game, making sure that the game gets safer. And I know it's been controversial, and they're working each day to make the program better by incorporating the feedback of bettors, trainers, veterinarians. So right now, HISA does not have control of any racehorses that are outside of once they make their first official work court at the racetrack. But we'd like to see, the potential for them to also clean up the sales game as well, because just as they're, I would say, bad characters and actors on the racing world, certainly they're also bad actors that we want to weed out of the sales side as well.
Yeah, and I also think with breeding, we do want to encourage. There is some incentive to make sure the right type of horses are being bred. Like for example, if you have horses that made their money and they were doped up, or they're not the proper type of horse we want to breed, it's going to affect the thoroughbred population for years to come, and it takes a while for some of these defects to probably manifest themselves.
Definitely. No, you certainly speak to a great point, Julian. And we want to ensure that the breed definitely has enough genetic differential makeup going forward, so we get more variety of racehorses. I know some of the breeding farms would be against that, and some of the stallion farms, but we really want increased competition, increased diversity of the breeding stock, so the thoroughbred continues to develop, and we don't get a whole bunch of unrelated, horses running against each other in the future.
Yeah. So are you optimistic about racing in general? Racing has challenges. Most of it comes from competition from other gambling. But it seems like it's weathered a lot of that storm. Racing has been able to persevere. We still have lots of interest in the Triple Crown races and the Breeders' Cup races. I know a lot of people worry that the number of bettors is decreasing in horses. The handle rises, but the number of discrete bettors is going down because of the syndicates that bet. Makes the competition's gotten tougher. But generally, all these challenges I'm talking about, are you optimistic about racing?
I am optimistic, and as a stakeholder here in New York, working with other stakeholders from other states, we just have to make sure that we're working together to make sure we're bringing the best quality of product to interested gamblers, and making sure that we have quality racing day in and day out. And there's a number of ways we can look at that. And what's the right number of days we should be racing to make sure that we're producing quality fields? And also with the advent of increased sports gambling from other industries and competitors, how can we work with them to also display racing on the front side of the page? I know there's a lot of ADWs, Naira Bets, and others looking to make agreements. And hopefully what you'll see one day is why not have a Kentucky Derby and MLB bonus, say Belmont and NBA Finals, or cross-sectional sports to introduce more gamblers into the industry. But I think we're doing a great job with the increased television coverage. I know Naira, we have Fox Sports here in New York that's done tremendous promotion for the New York Bred program and racing overall. And I think you're seeing great things with FanDuel TV and displaying racing. So we're definitely continuing to get mainstream eyes. We just have to make sure internally that we're putting forth the best product and make it the best for gamblers, looking at takeout rates and other ways.
Yeah. Well, speaking of takeout rates, Hawthorne, this meet put forth a 12% takeout, which is revolutionary. So I haven't looked at Hawthorne in many, many years because let's face it, it's old school track. It's probably having a renaissance because Arlington closed and it's the only track left in Chicago. But they've implemented 12% takeout and they got my attention, and I hope others. Do you think there's great possibilities with kind of bold action like this?
Yeah, I think so. I think you've seen even here in New York, we tried a variety of things. I believe we tried to institute it was an all turf pick 3 on Sundays during the Belmont meet last year, and looking at the pick 5 with the 15% takeout, and as you think the ways in which we're able to move forward here in New York, once we are able to have a Belmont Park as a full-time facility and not have to operate 2 facilities within 6 miles of each other, you can see executives making the better decisions of, okay, now we've got rid of some added expenses. How can we turn that to increase betting product? So I think there's a variety of measures that people are being looked at, making sure we're not running on top of each other with other tracks on post times, so we can work together as an industry to increase our wagering overall.
Yeah. So, and do you see when you decrease takeouts, does the level of betting activity, does it go up? Have you noticed that, or are these things to be continued? Things that we need to find out.
Yeah, of course. I think it's always something that we need to find out. On the other end of that, there are expenses for the racetrack and the operations that a lot of people don't realize, and the expenses of union employees and operating racetracks full time with various regions. But you would hope you have a quality product that with lower reduced takeout, more people would participate and actively wager. And, taking a look at that in those studies, I think most racetracks want to do the right thing because increased handles increase handle. And if Lauren Key Takeout is able to do so, I think the industry will come along and making those steps as well.
Yeah. In New York, are purses subsidized through slot gambling and other types of gaming, or are the tracks basically on their own to be profitable?
We do have a system of racing support payments. I don't like to use the word subsidies because, a deal was cut between, casino operators, state governments, and the racetrack themselves. Unfortunately, our detractors often want to say, racing is, getting just subsidies. It's not the case. Racetrack facilities were previously the only legalized gambling outlets in each state jurisdiction. So when nobody wants to have a casino next door to them. So where do you want to go to the casino? Put it in a racetrack. Well, if you're going to do that, you're decreasing the competition of racetracks and what we offer to the public. So you should have racing support payments to help pay for that. In addition, we talked about earlier some of the benefits that the breeding programs that have put forth in land preservation and increase jobs and economic opportunities for many individuals, often also naturalized citizens or immigrants coming into the country. I think it's a racing support payment system that is justified in what the benefits that racing bring, at least here in New York and other states as well.
Yeah, and if I have to use the word subsidy again, it wouldn't be the only industry that has a little bit of a subsidy. So let's be honest. So you mentioned full-time facility Belmont Park. Now, recently we've lost Arlington Park. There's been rumors that Pimlico was going to close, but I think that's on the side for now. But we've lost Bowie in Maryland, which is a place that I would go as a kid, which was a great place. But it was only 6 or 7 miles from Laurel as well. Hialeah's gone, Calder's gone, either Bay Meadows is gone. all these great tracks, all this history are gone. Now, in all those cases, except for Arlington, I think you could argue that you could have a better racing product at a track that was close by, so it made sense. Arlington, I don't think anyone's going to buy that argument with Hawthorne and Arlington. But do you still worry about the history that is lost, and do you worry that racing gets monotonous if it becomes year-round racing at just several tracks?
That's a good point, that maybe we will kind of wear out betters if we're just at these one-time facilities at most times of the year. But I think more importantly, we need to right-size the industry. I know here in New York, when you're having two racetracks within 6 miles of each other, it doesn't really make sense to operate two competing, facilities within that distance when you can bring up one facility to being a world-class facility, and doing so with the tradition and luster that Belmont Park has, not only in racing, but most people just walking down the street know of American Pharoah's Triple Crown win, know of the Secretariats, and it's the place where champions are made. So I think looking ahead to the future, we do need to right size the industry, and maybe it'll take a little bit of constriction, but in doing so, we can definitely put out a better product, and making sure that we have a redevelopment that is here in New York more approachable for fans, and that we're going to right size the facility. It won't be so cavernous, and it may not hold 100,000, but we're making improvements to rectify that, in opening up the infield for the first time, which is 45 acres. You're talking about redoing the grandstand, so it'll definitely feel packed, and it'll look like it's packed compared to what it is today.
Well, the grandstand, I mean, anyone who's seen the Belmont grandstand, when you first see it, it's just a sight to behold. I mean, it's a palace to racing. What are things that you can do with all that space? I mean, it's so big. I mean, you could probably have like 5 restaurants, bars. You could have. I mean, the possibilities are probably endless.
Yeah, and I think you're definitely right. It's about how do we upgrade that experience and attracting people out. And it is having those amenities of restaurants and shops, but also as well returning Belmont Park to being a park, a local community spot that will have green spaces for people to come back, enjoy, and still picnic and still enjoy the racing that takes place. And we know that most bettors have transition to wagering online or wagering from their phone. That's why we want to right size the building and the facility, but make it attractive enough for people to still come out as well.
Yeah. Well, Grant Pass, a racetrack in Oregon, recently closed, and me and you were soccer fans. They had a beautiful artificial soccer field in the middle of. I mean, how can you close a track like this? I'm sure they're still playing soccer on that field, but are there other creative ways with which to use the land of a racetrack to make it profitable? I know at Pimlico they have a pretty well liked concert series that goes on throughout the summers. Are there other ideas that can be implemented to use Belmont's space?
Yeah, I think everything's on the table. With 45 acres within the space of the middle of the facility, of a 1.5 mile oval main track and 2 turf courses, and what you'll see in the future, a synthetic racing surface, is you'll have a variety of options to host events throughout the year. And hopefully, we're even talking about possibly hosting a winter classic that, with that great space the Islanders play just outside of Belmont Park. So a number of opportunities that are on the table for discussion right now.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, I think you mentioned Tapeta, but if you didn't, you mentioned the synthetic track that's coming in. Now they introduced Tapeta in Gulfstream recently. Tapeta's been around for a while, and it's really well liked and well used in Europe, where the weather is more rainy than it is here, and it makes sense. They don't have the dirt courses that we have. What is the thought about Tapeta? Has it been controversial? I know a lot of bettors don't like it.
I think it's the fact that bettors don't like it is the sample size is still definitely small. And, there was a movement within, early 2000s and 90s where several racetracks did go to synthetics and return to a dirt track. But we found it to be very safe for horses. It's more conducive, as you says, to weather. So when we're looking at having Belmont Park operate as an all-year facility from September through July, we need a surface that will be durable and that'll be able to last through the winter. And we think synthetic would be the best way to not only do that, but attract turf horses to stay in New York and run throughout the winter. So looking at those aspects, I think that's why we're moving towards a synthetic option. And really as another option to save the turf course, to make sure that on good days, the turf is not chewed up or We've seen Gulfstream Park make strides in being able to do that and making sure their big days are run on the turf. We want to do the same in New York, and it'll really have the option to run all winter long.
I interviewed a trainer named Gina Rarick, and she's American, but she trains in France. And one thing that she said that I didn't know, you may know this, you worked at the backstretch probably with your uncle or whatever. At least you've been there. Horses are left-handed and right-handed like people. And she recommended American tracks should have tracks to go the other way. He said, you'll be surprised that some horses will improve. And I think it'd be great for a track like Belmont that could probably have multiple ovals to introduce racing. I guess that would be counterclockwise.
Yes, correct. Yeah, no, you make a great point, Julian. And I know we do have a current synthetic pony track, which is I believe 3/16 of a mile, but a smaller pony track that we do allow days where you're allowed to reverse train. So, I was speaking to several trainers, Karen McLaughlin, very former successful trainer. He liked to gallop his horses certain days to counterclockwise versus how they're racing, just to make sure you're actively building up the muscles on, both sides of your horse. Because if you're just making left turns all the time, you can, in theory, visualize a horse only working one half of their body. So you want to also work counterclockwise. So maybe it's something we can institute, some days for training as well.
Yeah, Gina Rarick says it really makes the horses healthier to be able to run different directions. It takes the monotony away from the game. So
yes.
The biggest blowback is the bettors. The American bettors like similar types of events because it's easier to handicap. Where in Europe, they're more accustomed to comparing apples to oranges. But she says that would be the biggest drawback in America is the bettors. We mentioned, you brought up a great point that too many times different tracks race on top of each other. So at 1 o'clock, you'll have 5 races going off at the same time from different tracks. Do you think we'll see more teamwork in that more jurisdictions will close for certain times of the year if the horse population continues to contract, so that you'll have interesting racing in different areas? Like, for example, in Kentucky, the big tracks close in the wintertime, and fairgrounds and Oaklawn kind of take up that slack, and it kind of works out. I'm not sure if it's a tacit agreement or not, but it seems to work itself out. The same thing happens with Gulfstream. They seem to operate with kind of some JV teams in some time of the year, and all the big stables come in the South. Do you think the tracks can do a better job of coordinating so that they don't have to run all year round, or would you get pushback from horsemen who expect NYRA to open a high quality product 12 months out of the year?
Yeah, I know that's an interesting scenario that you bring up. It's definitely a fine line. There has to be a balance, and we want to work with our partners. And as head of a breeders association in New York, you want as many opportunities for our New York breds to compete wherever they can and where they're most competitive to compete. We of course would love for that to happen in New York, but if it's other states as well, we would hope that other New York breds throughout the year would have opportunities to run and their trainers and connections to win in other areas of the country. But we have to make sure that wherever there is racing taking place, that post times are coordinated between jurisdictions and between racetracks. So bettors have the opportunity of knowing, yes, I can bet Belmont or Aqueduct or Saratoga on time, and it won't conflict with when I bet Oaklawn or Keeneland or Churchill, Gulfstream, Santa Anita, or anywhere else throughout the country.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Najja. I got one more question for you. I really appreciate your time. Social media is so big now. I'm as you know, we're Facebook friends. I'm really into local sports, so I interview a lot of local athletes. And social media has really has entered into the divide that was left, the void that was left by our newspapers no longer cover local sports. They can't. The Washington Post doesn't have the budget to cover the sports that they did when I was a kid. But social media has jumped in. There's Instagram, Facebook. You can get the scores. You can watch the replays. It's almost better than ever. Do you think racing is harnessing social media? I mean, there's podcasts. You can watch replays on YouTube. You can watch live races on YouTube. Is racing harnessing social media as it should?
I believe so. I think you've seen outlets such as there is Horse Racing Twitter, which is a great segment for going back and forth with individuals. And we certainly can always do a better job in making sure that we're promoting our product at its heights through whether it be, as you mentioned, Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, or any other social media outlet. But I think racing has really done a great job for at least cultivating a place where bettors can get together, and I've seen that most through Twitter. But we can certainly do more. But I think we are in the right direction.
Yeah, it's been incredible how I've built relationships with jockeys that I wouldn't have known, and people have been so accessible. It may not always work out that way because you get people that are really bitter when things don't go their way. But it is great how it has brought the racing community closer together.
Yeah, and that's really a segment of the game as well. If you go out to a racetrack in your neighborhood or town frequently, you'll get to know the jockeys, you'll get to know the trainers as you did in the past. But now we've brought that to, social media spaces and Twitter, where other spaces, and I know NBA or NFL, other sports, they're just getting that, closeness to the athletes or, key members in those professional sports. And racing, we've had that over time and just transitioned over to Twitter and other spaces as well.
Yeah, in the old days, we'd go to Charlestown and the jockeys would walk by us. We were, 2 or 3 feet from them. We get to know them. People would say smart remarks to them. Now, post parades throughout the nation, largely, there's no one even there anymore. And so there's no really exposure at the racetrack. The bettors are up there. If they're at the track, they're up there looking at simulcast somewhere else. But it's interesting how social media has allowed us to communicate with jockeys in a way we didn't back when I was going to the track, back in the 70s and 80s. But anyway, Najja, look, you're inspiration to minorities that are in the game. You're you do a great job. You really make us look great. We're proud of what you're doing. Thanks for being accessible and thanks for coming on and sharing your story. And, I wish you the best of luck in all you're doing. I'm sure you're going to go even further. But hopefully, we can talk more at a later date about, more racing issues.
Definitely. Thanks for having me on, Julian. And I would like to mention anybody interested in getting a career and a leg into the racing industry should reach out to organizations such as the Ed Brown Society or Amplify Horse Racing. Those are 2 great organizations looking to mentor and bringing young people and all people way into the game. And if you see me on Twitter or Facebook, please reach out as well. But really, thanks for having me on, Julian.
No, thanks for being on. And I'll put Ed Brown and what was the other Amplify.
Yes.
I'll put those in the comment section below so folks can find those. So
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Najja, look, have a wonderful day, and thanks again for doing this.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Julian.
Yeah, you're welcome.